Hello everyone, I'm Michaela Kathleen, and I'm here today with my January wrap-up. This month I read 5 books. I read the 3 Dark Crown series and I'll Give You the Sun. So first I picked up I'll Give You the Sun by Jandy Nelson. This was my first book of the year, and much like my first book of the year last year, Anna and the French Kiss, it is a contemporary young adult novel that has a lot of romance, although it does have quite a bit heavier topics than Anna and the French Kiss. But also, much like Anna and the French Kiss, it was a 4-star read, so again, I have started my year on a high note, so that's very nice. And of course, last year was my first year on BookTube, so Anna and the French Kiss is actually the first book that I read after starting my BookTube. So not just a high note for the first book of the year last year, but also for my first book on BookTube. But getting back to I'll Give You the Sun, as I said, this is a contemporary young adult novel, and it follows 2 twins, or one set of twins, Jude and Noah. And it is told in alternating chapters, and Noah's chapters take place when they are 13, and then Jude's chapters take place when they are 16, which is not exactly what I was expecting going into the book. The back cover just says Noah has the early years and Jude has the later years, and by this, my brain just automatically assumed teenage years and adult years, like I was imagining like in their 30s maybe. Which I guess for a young adult novel wouldn't have made much sense. That probably would have made it an adult novel instead, but that's just where my brain went. But yeah, because of this, I feel like sometimes the 16-year-old parts of it almost felt a little too adult for 16-year-olds. But yeah, the beginning of the book was good. At first, I mostly was connecting with Noah, but as the book went on, I did start to connect with both of the siblings quite a bit, and I also started to like the book more the further I went. It has a unique writing style, although if I was gonna compare it to other writing styles, even though it is quite unique, I think I would say it's like a combo of like John Green, Jennifer Niven, and David Arnold, who wrote Kids of Appetite. All authors that I like a whole lot, so this definitely was a writing style that worked for me. It was a very interesting way that the characters thought internally. They had interesting ways of phrasing things and thinking about things. They had a lot of quirks, which were fun. I like kind of quirky characters. Some readers might find it kind of annoying. It personally works for me. But one example of this is actually the explanation for the title, I'll Give You the Sun. The twins have this kind of ongoing game in their life where they're trading each other parts of the world and the universe for things. For example, early on, the sister sees a drawing that her brother has done, and she offers him up almost everything in exchange for this drawing, including the sun, the ocean, the stars, etc. So kind of an interesting, strange, like, metaphorical game that they're playing here in their lives, and there's kind of a lot of stuff like that in the book. I really enjoyed the relationship between the twins. I enjoyed it kind of both when they weren't getting along and when they were. I enjoyed it more when they were getting along because they just clicked so well together as characters, which is obviously a good thing since they're twins. That being said, some of the other relationships in the book I didn't really love. Mostly the sister's relationship with her love interest. To be fair, at first I thought that there was a bigger age difference than there actually was. The brother meets this character in his storyline, which takes place when they're 13, and I thought that he was like 21 or 22 at that time, meaning that he would have been way, way older than the sister in her 16-year-old storyline. But it turned out he was only 18 in the 13-year-old storyline, so he's 20 and she's 16. So still definitely in that line of being kind of creepy for a relationship, but not quite as bad as I thought. Regardless, I find her love interest to be very cliche. The age difference is a little bit concerning, and overall I just didn't really love the love interest for the sister. But on the flip side of that, I did like how the sister's first relationship was portrayed, and how it was made very clear that that relationship was not an okay relationship. because of the age difference, so it's a little weird that she then gets into another relationship with a big age difference. But I like that it was made clear that the sister was taken advantage of by her first boyfriend, even though she did not ever say no in her experience with him, just purely by the fact that she was 13 years old at the time. Obviously, by law, 13-year-olds can't give consent, so regardless of the fact that she didn't say no, and she also didn't say yes, even if she did say yes, it was still not an okay thing. And along with exploring that kind of line that some people would try to argue that the boyfriend wasn't in the wrong, and it made clear that in fact he was, there's a lot of other feminism explored in the book, which is really a joy to read. And there's some really great exploration of the mother-daughter relationship between the sister and her mother. The mother kind of favors the boy and becomes very like judgmental of the daughter and is kind of saying, do you want to be that girl if the daughter dresses in a way that she doesn't like? And the daughter kind of ends up flipping her thought process of the phrase that girl in her mind and comes to a place where she can really view it in a positive way, as like she's a girl who's not afraid to be herself and dress how she wants and do what she wants and not what society wants. And then also the book delves into exploring being a teenager who's LGBTQIA+. The brother Noah, in his 13-year-old storyline, is kind of discovering that he is gay and going through that whole process. And not being a part of that community myself, I can't speak too much to how well the representation is handled. I think it is handled pretty well, much like the feminism topics. But yeah, it's just a book that, to me, it feels like it handles a lot of really heavy topics really well. It also deals with loss a whole lot. And yeah, so it was a really enjoyable book that handles a lot of heavy topics, I think, pretty well. There are some places where I didn't love how it portrayed some things, like the relationship between the sister and her second love interest. It had a really unique writing style that I enjoyed, and so yeah, for me this was a 4-star read and a good way to start the year. I will say the book was also a little bit predictable. I kind of saw basically all of the twists coming. After that, I picked up the 3 Dark Crowns series by Kendare Blake, which the first book for me was a reread. I read this one last year and I wanted to pick up the entire series and finish it off this year, and I wanted to reread the first one to kind of refresh my memory. And this one was a 5-star read for me the first time around, so I was really excited to be finishing the series. This is a young adult fantasy in which each generation triplet queens are born. So again, interesting twins and triplets this month in all of my reading. When the triplets reach the age of 16, they have to vie for the crown. They have to kill each other, and the last one standing gets to be queen. So the first time I read this, I had a little bit of trouble keeping track of the characters. There's the 3 queens, and then each of them are surrounded by lots of friends and family and politicians. So it was a little hard to keep track of everyone, but it just had such an excellent setup. I was drawn in right from the beginning, learning about this island that they live on and the different powers that they have. People on the island are gifted with powers, and each of the 3 queens have a different power, and whichever one of them wins, the people of that power kind of get to be in charge of the island while she is queen. So they have poisoners, naturalists, elementals, the war gift, and oracles, which the war gift and oracles, none of the 3 queens are those powers, nor have any of the queens in recent history been either of those powers. Those powers are kind of waning on the island, and we don't learn much about them in the first book. But yeah, so our 3 queens are Arsinoe, a naturalist, but who has a very, very weak gift. She doesn't yet have an animal familiar even. And then we have Catherine, a poisoner, who also has a very weak gift, and Mirabella, an elemental, whose gift is very strong. So even though the poisoners have been in power for like 3 generations now, and she has a lot of powerful political people on her side, everyone is kind of expecting Mirabella to win. I personally liked Queen Arsinoe the best. She was so fun to follow. Part of it was that I found naturalists to be the most intriguing. I like animal sidekicks, and all the naturalists have animal sidekicks. Although Arsinoe's plot follows her friend Jules quite a bit. I would say her plot is kind of almost split 50-50 between her and her friend Jules, whereas the other two queens, when it's in their story, it's pretty much just following the queens. Catherine was my second favorite, not necessarily because she was the most likable, or rather the second most likable, but she just had a very interesting storyline. She has a lot of struggles because she's constantly being poisoned, even though she doesn't really have any skill as a poisoner. And then yeah, Mirabella was just kind of the perfect character, so she wasn't quite as interesting in this first book. And it was nice for the first half of the book. It kind of switched very steadily, Catherine, Arsinoe, Mirabella, and kind of got into this nice rhythm, and you got to know each of the three girls really well in the first half of the book, and then the order starts to change up once you kind of get to know them a little better. So again, it's got a nice setup with plenty of time to get to know the characters, which I really enjoy. I enjoy world building and getting to know characters really well. Some people kind of complain that they thought that the crown would be decided in this first book, and so they thought there would be a lot of fighting between the three sisters, but this first book is really more so about setting up the world, letting you get to know the characters, and setting up what the conflict will be in the second book, which I don't think really caught me off guard too much, because it's explained pretty early on in the book that the sisters are going to have this kind of thing where they show off their powers and meet their suitors from the mainland at the end of the book, and then after this big event, that's when they are allowed to start trying to kill each other. And so pretty early on in the book, you know that they're not going to start trying to kill each other until after the first book. So I didn't mind that that plot wasn't happening in this book. I still found everything really entertaining. To me, it still came off as such a dark, moody sort of book with like just really intriguing fantasy elements, and I just still found it really entertaining. And it kind of strangely reminded me of Peter Pan. They live on an island where there's magic, they're kind of cut off from the mainland, there's lots of fantasy and danger. So I don't know, it kind of reminded me of like a darker Peter Pan vibe, which I really enjoyed. The other thing that the books kind of reminded me of was The Prophecy of the Stones by Flavia Boujour, which is not a super well-known book, but it was one of my childhood favorites, and it's a fantasy book about three girls who are destined to save fairy tale land. And so yeah, it kind of reminded me of that childhood favorite, and again was kind of a darker take on that. Another really interesting element is that this is a matriarchal society. They have queens only, and so yeah, it's a matriarchal society, much more feminist. The queens obviously are still treated pretty terribly because they're expected to kill each other, and also there's this, they bear the triplets, the next set of queens, and after that they're just sent to the mainland and forgotten about. So they're still kind of breeding stock. But like overall, this society is still like very feminist. Women run all of the households. Men take women's last names. Like some of it's very subtle stuff that you don't even realize at first until you do, and then it kind of makes you look at how you think of society. For example, in the books they talk about the Queen's Guard a lot and soldiers and stuff, and they're all women, and you just kind of at first assume that they're men because they're soldiers and they're guards and all this, but even that, it's the women. Another interesting aspect of the book was low magic, which is a magic that the people of the island kind of look down upon because it's not one of the gifts. It's like a different kind of magic that is kind of performed more like outside of yourself, whereas the gifts are kind of coming from within, I guess is how you could describe it. But Arsinoe, since she does not have a very strong naturalist gift, is trying to accomplish some things through low magic instead. And it leads to quite a lot of drama in the book. She is trying to get herself a animal familiar through the use of low magic since she cannot do it herself, and she has some misadventures with a bear that is very dramatic and makes for some drama in the middle and some drama at the end. The book also has lots of interesting romance, lots of very complicated romance, all just keeps it very interesting. Also lots of intrigue and politics and twists and turns. Yeah, as I said, a very dramatic ending that had me very excited for when they actually would start trying to kill each other in the second book. All three of the queens went through really interesting growth throughout the book and were very different by the end of the book, but it was all like very believable growth and just really well-written growth. And yeah, it leaves like a lot of mysteries, a lot of good stuff to speculate about. Spoiler alert for the end of the first book, and actually spoiler alert for all of the books going forward. But at the end it is revealed that Arsinoe is actually a poisoner. She was never a naturalist at all, and so it kind of leaves you wondering, does that mean that Catherine is actually a naturalist and isn't a poisoner, and they were maybe switched at birth to give Mirabella an advantage? But that doesn't get answered in the first book, but that's kind of revealed at the end to leave lots of speculation for the sequel. One thing I will say about the first book that then kind of happened a lot throughout the entire series, but was my only kind of small complaint for the first book, was there was a lot of fake out deaths. I'm a fan of a good fake out death. Like, it's fine to do that sometimes, it's dramatic and stuff, and it kind of gives you the oh no of a death, but then, oh good, my favorite character isn't actually dead. But there were just too many of them. The most kind of dramatic one was Catherine getting thrown into the big giant hole where they used to throw dead queens by her love interest, which his reasoning for this, I don't buy. Who's throwing the person they're in love with down a hole in order to save them from being murdered by someone else? Not me. This is just not even the first. This is just part of the long line of me not liking Peter, which is Catherine's love interest. He's probably my least favorite character of the series. But yeah, ending on the not liking Peter note, on to book 2, which is One Dark Throne. Which One Dark Throne kind of starts on this mystery of what is going on with Queen Catherine. She's been thrown down into this hole, but she comes back looking much worse for wear and is ready to go, ready to get this crown. She wants her revenge and her crown. And the back of the book synopsis says that she has inherited a power stronger than anyone could have suspected. And so with this, I was thinking maybe she didn't get switched with Arsinoe at birth and isn't just a naturalist, and my mind at first just went to the war gift because that seemed like it would be a nice gift to have in trying to murder your way to the crown. But it became clear pretty quickly that that's not what was going on. There was a lot of mystery built up around Catherine. Quick side note, this book had an index of the characters, which would have been really nice in the first book. As I said, I had a little bit of trouble keeping the characters straight in the first book, but by the time getting through the reread of it and then getting on to book 2, I kind of had the characters down for the most part, so the index wasn't as useful. It was nice to have, but not as useful as it would have been in the first book. But yeah, this book had just kind of a lot going on with like the powers, with Catherine suddenly having all these powers that was very mysterious as to where they came from and what was going on. And then also Jules, Arsinoe's friend, turns out to not only be a naturalist and a very strong naturalist, but also she has the war gift. But apparently having 2 gifts at the same time is actually a curse. They call it the Legion Curse, and it drives people insane. But her mother, who does low magic, has bound the war gift, made it kind of recede so that she can live a normal life. So lots of interesting things going on with the gifts in this book. Meanwhile, Arsinoe is still practicing low magic, even though it's caused all of her problems thus far. And it just kind of randomly suddenly starts working for her. Suddenly, the bear that she tried to make into her familiar in the first book is her bear now, it's fine. So yeah, low magic kind of, it's interesting, but also it starts to lead to a lot of like plot conveniences throughout the books. That being said, I love the bear. I love Braddock. Very happy that the low magic randomly started working on him. And now I will go into a side note that I love all the familiars. I maybe have mentioned this already for the first one, but really, all the familiars, I love them so much. I love Braddock, the bear, so lovable, so huggable. I love Camden, Jules's cougar. I like the roosters, Hank, who is actually a familiar to one of the side characters, and then Harriet, who Arsinoe's mainlander love interest sort of just adopts. He's not a naturalist, but he just adopts this chicken and loves this chicken. And I love the chicken too. And Pepper, the little woodpecker that is a familiar to one of the priestesses that's friends with Mirabella, is so cute. I could go on and on about the familiars. I could also go on and on about Arsinoe and Billy. This is my favorite romance in the book. Don't really care for Jules and Joseph. Don't care for Joseph and Mirabella. Really don't like Peter, but I love Billy so much. He's so sweet, so good. I like him becoming friends with Mirabella, their little alliance and friendship that happens and is kind of maintained throughout the books. I will say, I expected more action out of this book. The first book, I was fine with it being world building and character building and kind of just building up to the big sort of ongoing battle between the queens. This book, I expected that battle to be very action-packed, and it wasn't quite as action-packed as I expected. The three of them getting invited to the festival felt very strange to me. Any time where everyone was sort of cooperative and friendly felt strange because they're trying to kill each other. And then I also was pretty disappointed by the ending. And actually, apparently, this originally was going to be the ending for the whole series, and if that had happened, I would have been so angry. As it was just kind of mildly unsatisfactory. If it had been the ending for the whole series, I would have been so mad. Jules just randomly deciding to go back to the island was so strange. To be fair, I think it was the right thing to do with her character. Like, she would have lost her power on the mainland and lost her familiar, Camden the cougar. So I guess I just don't know why she was planning to go with them in the first place, why she changed her mind. Her just jumping off the boat randomly was so random. And yeah, there just didn't feel like there was a lot of resolution at the end of the book, which is fine since the series did end up continuing. But yeah, the ending just, there's some things about it that just didn't sit right with me. So overall, this was my least favorite book in the series. I originally gave all the books 5-star ratings, but I think this one probably was really more like a 4-star. My favorite thing in the book was the mystery surrounding Catherine. Going back to that, there were so many theories. The book gave you plenty of time to come up with like 10 different theories before kind of finally somewhat revealing what was going on. I do feel like this book could have had a better, more full explanation of what was going on when it finally did get to the explanation. I feel like I didn't fully understand until the third book, even though it was pretty much revealed in this book. But yeah, there was a place where I was wondering if maybe there were multiple goddesses out there and like she was like maybe working for them. I wondered if she was possessed, which she kind of was. I wondered if their mother had known about this, like if this was something that was with her from birth or if this was something brand new. All very intriguing. And then the first like kind of real like mild explanation of what had happened gave me chills when Catherine was talking about all of the dead queens in this whole being murdered and forgotten, and then she goes, and they are tired of it, to Peter. I was like, oh, these queens are out to kill. They're out for revenge. There were some actual deaths in this book. Not every single death was a fake out death, so that was nice. Although 2 of the deaths were stupid. Arsinoe like losing her poisoned knife on the ground and someone picking it up and using it to cut food, and then her 2 suitors eating the food and dying of the poison. It was so stupid. But yeah, so not quite as strong as the first one. It was my least favorite of the series, but still quite enjoyable. So then moving on to the third one, Two Dark Reigns. I'm going to try to speed this up a little because I've been talking about these forever. I liked this one better than the second one. Still not as much as the first one. The first one was my favorite. I liked that this one started out with a scene from queens way in the past. I found it interesting to learn more about past queens in this book. I wish that we had gotten kind of a similar birthing scene with the three current queens to kind of see what went on there with the whole switching them at birth thing, and like what the mother knew and like what her thought process was for that. That would have been nice and interesting because we never really get a super full explanation of what went on with these three queens, with the whole giving Arsinoe to the naturalists even though she's a poisoner, and Catherine being kind of giftless and just being given to the poisoners. But alas, we never did really get a super full explanation of all of that. My least favorite part about this book, for sure, was Arsinoe and Mirabella being on the mainland. I didn't enjoy the mainland. I didn't find it interesting. At first I was kind of excited to like learn more about the mainland, but the mainland kind of sucks and I didn't like it. And I also found it kind of weird that they just live at Billy's. Like, they didn't know that his dad was dead, and so I don't think his dad would have found it okay when he came back for them to be living there. So that was just kind of strange. I guess I don't know where they would have lived instead. Again, like I said, this one kind of has more of a full explanation of what went on with Catherine, with the whole falling into the hole and the dead queens saving her by inhabiting her body thing. But the explanation felt a little bit too little too late. There were definitely some dramatic events in this book. The mist around the island starts kind of attacking the island in this book, and that first scene where the dead bodies wash up on shore was so dramatic, and everyone whispering that Catherine's the undead queen right after that was also very dramatic. And this happening just as Jules is being told that she has kind of support from the island for her to be the Legion Queen made it even more dramatic. That is the word of the moment. Dramatic. And speaking of Jules, we've got this whole storyline where like she's the Legion Queen and people want her to kind of end the line of queens, and we have this moment where this oracle says that she was a queen once and can be a queen again. And I thought that Jules would end up maybe being descended from Daphne, a former sister of a queen that Arsinoe is dreaming about. But alas, she is not, because Daphne actually ends up being the queen who has the triplets in that storyline in the past. But again, this was another kind of like the Catherine thing, a good kind of mystery thing going on that allowed a lot of time for kind of theory making, but it didn't really end up paying off. I feel like we never got a proper explanation of Jules. I think we're meant to believe that she's maybe like the reincarnation of the first ever queen, but it's never really spelled out clearly that that's what's going on. And so yeah, the mystery kind of just never pays off with Jules. In this book, my second least favorite character is introduced after Peter, and that is Amelia, which becomes Jules's new love interest. And I just think she very much is like using Jules, especially at first, and she just isn't nice or really even respectful of Jules's other relationships. Not romantic ones like her friendship with Arsinoe and stuff, which I just don't think is very nice in a love interest. Another theory that I had kind of going into this book was that there was going to be a fourth sister who's been on the mainland this whole time, that maybe the mother took with her so that the other three daughters, the other three queens, wouldn't have to be murdered at birth, which is tradition in these books. If there's a fourth born queen, she is believed to be the chosen queen, and the other three are just killed off at birth so that the fourth one can be queen. So I thought that maybe was going to happen, and it didn't. So once again, did not learn as much about the mother of our three current queens as I would have liked. Another surprising and nice surprise was that Catherine turns out to actually be a really good queen in this book. I thought that she was going to be a terrible queen. She's kind of at this point being set up to be more of a villain, and yeah, I thought she was just going to be kind of a bad queen with not a lot of depth, but she actually turns out to be like a really good queen, like good at politics, good at making decisions, just like a legitimately good ruler, which I found much more interesting than her just being evil or terrible or bad at her job or whatever. And it ends up kind of making it like too bad that it all gets ruined by the undead queens. Which brings me back to my least favorite character, Peter, who is responsible for the undead queens. To be fair, Cat might not have survived the Ascension without the undead queens, but that's regardless. Peter is still a terrible person. And in this book, he is still going behind Catherine's back, doing things that might get her killed, in an attempt to save her or help her or whatever. And I was so excited at the end when it backfired on him and he ended up dying. I put air quotes because again, it was a fake out death. But yeah, that's picked up in the next book, the final book, Five Dark Fates. At the beginning of which is revealed that Peter did not in fact die at the end of the last book. Instead, he just slipped into a coma. And when he comes out of that coma, he switches sides real quick and decides he's down for killing Catherine again because he's a terrible love interest. And yeah, this one, again, I didn't like it as much as the third, but I did like it better than the second. In this one, again, there was a lot of plot conveniences and kind of inconsistencies, which bugged me. I still enjoyed reading it. I still would probably give it 4 stars, but just didn't reach that pinnacle of the 5 stars from the first book. At one point there was a kind of a spy set up and we never got a reveal for who that was. All of the characters are really terrible at keeping secrets in this book. And then yeah, it's set up that Mirabella's death will end the mist. That turns out not to be true. Although Arsinoe is briefly able to get the mist out of her way using low magic. It makes sense that what eventually gets rid of the mist is the mist defeating the undead queens. But just along the way, there's all these things that don't make perfect sense. There's lots of characters making odd choices, like when Jules and Amelia just run off to Bastion City all by themselves with an entire army headed that way. And then they see what was done to the city, everyone being killed clearly in unnatural ways. And then they ride into this battle at the end of the book that they know is going to have that same force that they're facing. So it's like they know they don't stand a chance, but they don't come up with any sort of alternate plan other than just going into battle. So yeah, lots of little kind of not really nitpicky things. They're kind of big things that don't necessarily jive or work, but still a fun, enjoyable read. A super fun fantasy series. One that didn't quite live up to the expectations that the first book gave me, but that still was like an overall 4 or 5 star read throughout the series. I feel like part of it is that I am paying more attention to these types of things now that I'm taking notes as I read and thinking about what I'll say at the book at the end of reading it. I feel like if I had read this when I was younger, I would have even liked it a lot more. But yeah, still a super fun series. Again, I really loved the characters so much. I connected with all of them. They were all very interesting, all really well fleshed out, all went in very interesting journeys. The world building, it slacked off a little bit as the series went on with some of the inconsistencies and stuff, but I really enjoyed the world building, especially in the first book. The plot was always very interesting, even if, again, there were some inconsistencies. But for this one, it really hangs on the characters. That's one thing that stayed consistent throughout the series. I never liked the characters any less than I did in the first book. The characters are really a joy to read and very interesting and well fleshed out and go on really interesting journeys. So yeah, these were the books that I read in January to start off my year. One 4-star contemporary YA and a really fun fantasy series that I'm super excited to have completed. Let me know down below what books you started your year off with. Thanks for watching. Remember, words matter.